You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 120. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here. Thank you so much for joining me here this week. I'm delighted to have you with me. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Today, we are talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. We are talking about returning to work after mat leave and beyond. If you have been listening to this podcast, then you know that I am the very proud mother of 2 children. I have a son who is going to be 11 years old tomorrow, as of the time that I'm recording this podcast, and a daughter who will be 9 in about a month's time. And so, interestingly, I became a mother. I went through this transition of going from being a new mom to going back to work at an office exactly 10 years ago. And even though it was a decade ago, I can still remember clear as day what it was like to transition my son, because he was the first one to go through this transition, from being the little baby that I was with almost every day of my year-long mat leave to leaving him with a childcare provider for the first time. He attended a daycare near the house where we still live, and I remember taking him to the daycare for the interview, the initial interview, getting him all dressed up in a white polo shirt and a pair of khaki shorts and trying to be as charming as possible, putting on our very best behavior because we really wanted to have a secured spot for him by the time I went back to work. So this all happened in the months leading up to my return to the office. I can also remember very clearly the initial gradual entry where I would leave my son for an hour at a time at the daycare, and I would walk him over. I would drop him off with the woman who ran the daycare, and then I'd walk over to the nearest Starbucks and sit and cry for an hour before I'd go back and pick him up. That's exactly what it was like for me, and I understand that it's like that for many of you as well. That being said, 10 years later, I've now had more experience. I've seen what the trajectory looks like over the course of time. I've had friends go through the transition. I've had clients go through the transition. And what I'm excited to share today is some ideas, some suggestions, maybe even some advice about how to navigate those early years, how to navigate that initial transition and the years beyond that, sharing with you the benefit of that experience. So I'm going to offer 5 key tips. They're really grouped into 5 key themes, and I'm going to jump into those in just a minute. Before I do that, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that I see among lawyers in my coaching practice and some of the challenges that I experienced when I was going through the transition. So the first big challenge that I experienced and that I've seen others experience is just the weight of what it means to be a mom. And what that means is a dramatic increase in your domestic responsibilities. Before I had children, I didn't think very much about how much time it took me to organize food or laundry or tidying up my living space. I mean, these are things that took some amount of time, but it was relatively modest in the grand scheme. But once the little humans come along, you know, if you're in it, how much laundry they generate, how much more food prep you are involved in, how much more you need to keep your house in order, especially as they become mobile. All of a sudden, there's more mess that is generated. There's things that move from one part of the house to the other part of the house. That side of it, believe me, just continues as the children get older. And so whereas before children, you may have been able to devote your full attention to your professional work and perhaps your social life and any hobbies that you had, you now have this larger and very committed, dedicated responsibility to your child and to all the factors at home that are required to sustain that child and to help that child thrive, of course. So what that means is not only are you doing an extra job effectively, but there's also an organizational component to that, because as you return to work, you're stepping back into office life and the organization that it requires to run a legal practice. And while you're not at work, you're kind of running a side hustle of keeping your domestic life in order. So that may mean daycare. It may also mean a part-time nanny. I had that for my son. We had a part-time nanny on top of the daycare because there was no way I could do pickups and drop-offs at the times that were required and still do my professional work. So I had a part-time nanny who would help out. We had family who helped out. With my daughter, we did a nanny share arrangement. So not only are you managing your workload at the office, but you're also running this small side hustle on the side. Cleaners may be involved in that. And so your organizational skills are really getting tested to the max. You may also find that physically you're more worn out or less rested than you were before having children. So you may have a child who doesn't sleep very well, so you're not getting a full night's sleep. You have less sleep because you've also got additional responsibilities that you are taking care of. You might find that you have less access to some of the things that you used to do to recharge, whether that's exercise, time with your friends, time spent at movie theaters, restaurants, the places that you might otherwise go to fill up your bucket may be less available to you. You may find that there's a heightened sense of needing to prove yourself, to prove to your colleagues at work that you're just as good, if not better than you were before you went on mat leave. You're wanting to prove yourself at home, showing that yes, you're a qualified and adequate, competent parent, mother. And you may find that there's that sense of heightened responsibility and that extra pressure that you're putting on yourself. You may have heightened responsibilities at work to reestablish your practice after being on leave for some time. And what you might also find is that you have these additional expectations, and you might feel like you're trying to do everything on all fronts, and yet you're not able to meet the standards that you are setting for yourself. So in that context, in that environment, you can see how there are a number of challenges. Another challenge is an additional feeling of isolation. So when you are in that new mom stage and you're with your child for so much of the day, you may have really good resources and support that help you feel connected. But you may also find that you feel a little bit disconnected, and that because you have less time available, you're not as easily able to establish connections with your professional colleagues. So I mention these challenges because they're not insurmountable. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't work or you shouldn't have children or any of that. But what I'm highlighting here is that the return to work and beyond is a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. And so if you are finding it difficult, you are by no means alone. And that's really why I think it's important to have these conversations, for me to be as transparent as I can be, to help you see that these are challenges that many parents are facing and that there is support available to you. So I'm going to offer 5 different suggestions, which I hope are going to help you as you navigate this period of your life. And the first suggestion, or the first piece of advice or guidance, is that there is no right way or wrong way to do the work life, parenting, working parent, whatever you want to call it. There's no right or wrong way to do it, and you are definitely not alone. So as an example, when I was younger, 10 or plus years ago, when my son was first born and we were sleep training him, there was this really fascinating article that went viral, and it was full of contradictory advice about sleep training. Things like, don't sleep with your child because you'll roll over and squash them, to you must sleep with your child or they will always have attachment issues. Don't put your baby on their stomach. They will then suffocate. You must put your child on the back. Whereas decades before that, it was that you absolutely must put your child sleeping on their stomach. Swaddle, don't swaddle. All the different contradictory advice that was given to parents. And of course, it is confusing. And each piece of advice has some degree of research or credibility to back it up. And what I took from that article is that there is always going to be someone who's willing to share how you should do things, including myself in this podcast potentially. So if what I'm sharing here doesn't resonate with you, that's totally fine. It is up to each individual parent to know themselves, to know their child, and to make decisions that make the most sense based on their own unique set of circumstances. So for each of you, I would invite you to be the expert, be the authority in your own life, in your own work, in your own family, because ultimately there's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. And whatever works best for you is the right way for you. So that's the first piece of advice that I wanted to share with you. Now, the second piece of advice, the second suggestion that I want to offer is that I invite you to assess your choices based on your unique circumstances. So following up on that original idea that there is no right or wrong way to do it, there are a number of categories of factors to consider that I find are fairly consistent among new parents and even parents that are not new parents. This goes well into the years that your children are growing through the toddler phase, the going to school phase, and for me, entering almost that what you might consider middle school phase. Now, the first factor to consider, of course, is your child. Every child is so different. If you have more than one child of your own, then you will already see that. Same parents, dramatically different children. When you have a child, you have no control over their disposition and how they show up in the world. You may have a child who sleeps for hours at a time, is extremely docile, eats everything that you put in front of them, never cries, never fusses, never has a need beyond kind of the basics. And if that is you, then you'll have a very different experience from what it might be if you have a child who has needs that go beyond what you might consider average. So for example, your child may have a mental disability, a physical disability. Your child may fall somewhere on the spectrum of neurodiversity. Your child may have ADHD or autism or dyslexia or some other aspect or manifestation of neurodivergence. And what you might find is that some of the manners of sort of classic or usual or standard parenting. And I say this thinking there really is no normal, there really is no one single standard, but you may find that you have additional challenges on your plate and that the energy and focus and time that is required for you to raise your child, to give your child the support and the attention that they need, it will go beyond what other children may need. You may have a child who is highly resistant to after school care or having anybody apart from you or your partner look after them. And that is going to add additional stress to your arrangements because it's going to be more challenging when you drop your child off at daycare if they're crying and holding onto your leg and you're having to leave them because you've got a meeting that you need to get to. So first and foremost, when it comes to shaping the return to work and beyond that works best for you, you need to take into account the child or the children that you yourself have. And each of them is going to be different. Each of them is going to require something different. And so your choices are going to flow from that, and they may be different from what other people are doing. So the second variable that I invite you to consider is your partner. And most of the lawyers that I work with, not all of them, but most of them are in a partnership. You have a husband, you have a wife, you have somebody who is there who is helping you raise your child or children. And so your partner's role is, of course, highly relevant to your role. You may have decided between the two of you that either your partner or you is going to be the primary income generator within your household. You may decide that one of you will be more committed or more available for pickups and drop-offs. In my family, for example, my husband travels for his work. And so that means that I am the one who is dedicated to being available for things like kids getting sick, having to, back when they were in daycare, having to pick them up from daycare or keep them at home if they couldn't go to daycare. I did the bulk of the discussions with our nannies when we had nannies. I would coordinate the cleaners, and I still am responsible for meal prep during the week. And so each of you is going to have a different arrangement with your family and your partner, and you will each decide what works best based on the situation that you are in, the role that you play and the role that they play. And if you are the dedicated primary income generator for your family, your decisions and your choices are going to reflect that, versus if your partner is going to be the primary income generator, then you may adapt around their schedule. Maybe you're on equal footing. There is no limit to how this can look, but that of course is going to influence how you manage your integration of work and life. And work and life meaning your personal, non-professional work. You may also have different perspectives and opinions in terms of what is appropriate or desirable from a parenting standpoint. And so you may want to have discussions about that so that you can align yourselves as much as possible. And finally, when it comes to your partner, you'll also want to think about your relationship more strategically. When you are a partnered or in a couple and you're balancing work and you're balancing your relationship and your, secondary relationships outside of that, your family, your friends, people who you don't necessarily live with, who are clearly important to you, but they may come secondary to that first and foremost partnership that you have. When you introduce a child or children, then there is now less time, less focus, less energy available for the relationship that you have with your partner. And on top of that, you've also got a number of additional stresses because now you're looking after the children. You're trying to figure out how to look after the children. You're going back to work. There's demands on you. There's demands on your partner. And so you're navigating all of that in the context of your relationship. And what can often happen is that the relationship doesn't get the attention that it certainly doesn't get the attention that it had before. And that can cause some tension and ruptures in the relationship you have with your partner. So you're going to want to think about how you can strategically stay connected, how you can stay on the same page, how you can foster that relationship, knowing that you're going to have all of these other demands on your time, focus, and energy, and you're going to want to be intentional about how you prioritize. The third factor to consider, of course, is your work. So you are working potentially at a law firm, at a government organization, in-house, a nonprofit, maybe you have your own firm. Each of these work situations is going to look quite different in terms of how you then need to arrange yourself to have that work-life balance, integration, whatever you want to call it. So each of these will have a different level of flexibility. I think the pandemic was a huge benefit in the sense of obviously not the negative aspects of the pandemic, but from a working flexibility perspective, I think it has significantly leveled the playing field for professionals who have families who now have the capacity and permission to work from home at least part of the time. That makes a big difference in terms of being available for pickups and drop-offs, putting a chicken in the oven, throwing a load of laundry in while you're at work, basically. So there's a lot of convenience that comes from having that flexibility, but not all employment or professional work allows for that flexibility. So again, that's something that you're going to want to consider. There may also be flexible arrangements in terms of what is offered. So if you're at a law firm, for example, you may be able to negotiate an 80% arrangement. You may be able to negotiate a path. Maybe there's the partnership track, and then there's perhaps an alternative track that may allow for a somewhat reduced working schedule for a period of time. So there's all these different ways that you might look at your work and think about, okay, do I need to make any changes to the job that I have in order to make this work more effectively? Other things you might consider at your work, are there targets that you need to meet? Are you going to be able to meet those expectations? For example, if you have a 2,000 hour expectation, is that feasible with your current family situation? That number may feel different depending on your practice. In some practices, it may be easier, for example, to accrue the billable hours that you need to meet your targets. Other practices are more difficult to accumulate those hours. So you'll need to look at your practice, you'll need to look at your targets, you'll need to look at your family and assess what makes the most sense for you. You may also think about the culture of your organization. Is it one that supports young parents or parents of young children? Or are you the only one there? Do you feel like you're out of place? Do you feel like you're supported? That will make a difference. What stage are you at in terms of your career? Is this a stage where you need to be ramping up and putting in 200% at work? Or is it a phase where you can maybe pull back a little bit, scale your practice back a little bit while you navigate certain aspects of your personal life? And then finally, what is your long-term potential at the organization that you're in? Is it a place where you see yourself for the long run? And if so, how do you want to navigate the next few years? Or is it a place where you don't see yourself having a future, in which case, what other options are available to you? So thinking about your work, that's a component that you'll want to take into account. What I have seen with a number of lawyers that I've worked with, lawyers that I've had the benefit of knowing socially, is that there's often a change of pace when the family comes along. For some lawyers, that does mean reducing their work schedule. For some, it does not hold them back in terms of advancing professionally, whether it's moving into partnership at their firm or having promotions in their respective organizations. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're scaling back, that you're not advancing professionally. For some, it does mean if they're in a practice where hours are really important and they simply don't want to have that lifestyle, they want to have more time available for their family. They don't maybe want the unpredictable nature of their practice. It's too hard for them to manage with their families. Then they may opt for something that is more predictable. They might opt for something where they can set their own schedule, for example. Maybe they open their own firm or start their own independent practice or join an organization where there are set hours. But making a transition around that time is very common. And so that may be something that you're looking at doing. Maybe you're thinking about what is the best way to make my professional work and my non-professional work more compatible with each other. So that was a factor, is to think about your work. So we've looked at your child, your partner, your work. Then there are philosophies about childcare and housework and who should do all of that. And what I'd invite you to think about here is, what is your own desire when it comes to outsourcing some of those domestic obligations or responsibilities that I alluded to earlier: the laundry, the meal prep, the child care, the tidying, all of those things that are required to keep your household going. And for some, you may decide that you want all of that under your control. You don't want anybody else in your house. This is something that we experienced during the pandemic. We really had to scale back. We had cleaners at that point. We scaled back. We still haven't really reintegrated that, which is not a conscious choice. It's more of one of those things we just haven't gotten around to reinstating the way that we would like to. But some people will have a resistance to outside help, versus some people will have very much welcoming affinity to it, hiring something like a household manager to take care of all the odds and ends and even orchestrating family life. There are many variables in between. You may have a nanny, you may have a part-time nanny, you might have cleaners, you might have someone who does meal prep, you might rely on family members to help you with components of the domestic role that somebody needs to play. So you might just think about what your philosophy is there and what you are most comfortable with when it comes to time with your kids. For example, maybe having somebody who comes in and helps with meal prep will free you up so that you can spend more quality time with your kiddos. And so that might be something that you choose to do. And you might also decide that, you need more support at home. You need someone to help you get through the mornings with your family, somebody who can be there when you get home to help put dinner on the table, whatever it happens to be. But absolutely consider what your options are. And you might even make a list of the things that are kind of time consuming that you don't particularly enjoy doing, and then start thinking about ways to outsource them. Now, of course, another factor that is very closely aligned with support is finances and what kind of financial considerations are at play. What is your capacity to spend on childcare and domestic help? And what I'd invite you to consider here is, as you're looking at your budget, you will probably be looking at, what makes the most financial sense in the situation that you are in personally. And it will potentially be it's certainly pre-children expenses. I mean, the expenses that we've had, especially at the beginning, but the expenses continue on looking after your children. It's one of those things that is relatively shocking at the very beginning because you're just not used to it. So on top of the childcare, just basic daycare or nanny looking after your child, the extras might seem a little bit daunting. The laundry, the cleaning, the meal prep. But what I'd invite you to think about here is to look at not only can we afford it today, but to also ask yourself what it is allowing you to create for yourself professionally that will allow you to command a higher salary as you progress in your career. It's almost like when you're paying your mortgage on your house and you're making that investment, you're, sustaining the house, but behind the scenes, your house is accruing in value simply by the nature of you holding on to the property itself. It increases in value. You're kind of the same thing. As you're committing your financial resources to supporting you so that you can continue in the professional development side of your life, that professional development is paying dividends at the other end where you are still in the game, you're still progressing, you're still advancing. And so your capacity to earn is also increasing. So yes, it seems quite expensive while you're going through it. And that can be a real challenge. I've worked with a lot of lawyers who are very resistant to the cost of investing in the help. And what I've seen, what I've observed is that that investment is one that makes sense from a financial perspective when you are then able to take the benefit of the time that you've been able to commit to your professional development and then earn a greater salary on the other side of it. So that's a factor that I would invite you to consider if it's something that you haven't really been giving a lot of thought to already. So that's another factor, of course. So the last factor, and just to go through these factors one more time under the rubric of things you might consider as you are designing your ultimate or the balance or integration between your professional and personal life that works best for you. The factors there are your child, your partner, your work, your childcare and household philosophies in terms of what should be sent out, the financial considerations, and then finally you. And you really shouldn't be at the end of this list, but you're there. And I would invite you to absolutely take yourself into account when you are designing your ultimate setup for your family, for you, for your professional work. So what makes you happy? Ask yourself what makes you happy. And even if answering that question seems like a stretch, I'd invite you to do it because it will help you to identify some of the aspects that you may want to start working toward, even if it seems improbable now. I would invite you to ask what most aligns with your values. So think about how much time do you want to spend with your family? What role do you want to have within your family? How do you want to be as a parent? What's most important to you? How do you want to be as a partner? Think about your role as a professional. What do you want to accomplish as a professional? How present do you want to be? How available do you want to be? I would encourage you to make intentional and conscious choices about how you want to show up. And that will help you to then align your actions and your decisions with the values that you set for yourself. Ask yourself what you need for self-care. Self-care isn't just going to the spa once every 6 months and then ticking it off your to-do list. Self-care is making sure that you have the sleep that you need, adequate nutrition, exercise. Is your mental health being supported? Are you being supported? Do you have friends? Do you have interests? Are you able to live a life where you are reasonably content? And I get it, especially those early years when the baby isn't sleeping and you're just back at work and everything feels crazy and new. But your mental health, your physical health, all of it matters. You matter. And so whatever it is that you need for self-care, I would invite you to think about what fills your bucket and to find ways to incorporate those things into your day-to-day. So that was point number 2 is let's look at the factors that you will consider in designing your life as you return to work after maternity leave and beyond. The third thing I'd invite you to consider is that you do not need permission. You may feel like you need somebody else to give you their blessing when it comes to some of the difficult decisions that you are going to need to make. You will need to make decisions between work and family. You'll need to make them from the outset. I'm 10 plus years in. I can tell you, I guess I'm technically 11 years in, but there are decisions that I make daily that call for me to make a choice in the moment between committing to my family and committing to my professional work. It is an ongoing decision-making process. And so you are going to need to learn to give yourself permission to choose what you choose in the moment and to keep a balance that aligns with you. You're going to need to trade time for money. So sometimes you might trade your money in order to save time, and sometimes you might spend your time in order to save you money. So cleaning is a good example. You might hire somebody to do some of that because you want to buy your time, right? It's cheaper for you to pay them and to make money than it is to do it yourself and then lose out on that opportunity to do professional work. So you're going to have to make those choices and you get to give yourself permission. Yes, you'll probably want to check with your partner if you're spending out of your shared family resources, But ultimately, you don't need somebody to tell you it's okay to have a cleaner come in to do work if that's really going to help you move things forward, if it's going to create greater mental health, physical health, overall satisfaction for you. You're going to potentially struggle with decisions where it's you doing it yourself versus outsourcing. For many high achieving women, and I include myself in this category, I know a lot of you feel the same way. You may feel like you really should do it yourself. You are responsible, you're capable, you're hardworking. You don't want to come across as being lazy or shirking your responsibilities. So you take it on yourself. And what I'm inviting you to open up to as a possibility is that you don't have to do it all. I am giving you permission if you need it. But what's even better than that is for you to give yourself that permission to not do it all. You're also going to need to make conscious decisions about self-care. So sometimes you're going to have free time and you can either invest it in your children or your work or your partner or yourself. And sometimes I'm going to invite you to spend that energy, that focused time on yourself. Mom guilt versus work guilt. Sometimes you're going to be at work thinking about your kids and vice versa. And that's okay. I also invite you to adopt a sense of compassion for yourself and to let go of the need to be perfect. Sometimes you are going to need to accept those very beginning stages. Maybe it's, all the food that you're giving your baby isn't organic. Their sheets are not necessarily made out of bamboo. It might be that you have parents or family members or nannies or babysitters who don't have exactly the same parenting philosophy that you do, and that is okay. Maybe your playdates are not particularly well orchestrated. Maybe you're not throwing the fanciest birthday parties. Maybe your house is extremely messy. These are all things that can happen. I remember during the pandemic and we needed to introduce screens into our children's lives way earlier than my husband and I had planned to, particularly in terms of getting a device where they could do their schoolwork. And that was not what we had intended. And yet sometimes you just have to roll with it. And sometimes, yes, my kids will be on the screen more than I would like them to be. Right now is a perfect example. As I'm recording this podcast, my son is on his phone. Yes, we just got him a phone for his birthday. My daughter is watching TV. Is this the dream that I had for my last few days of the summer vacation? Well, we are going out of this, but sometimes it means, yes, things aren't going to be perfect. And that is totally fine. So what I'm trying to say here is I am giving you permission, as I mentioned earlier, better yet, give yourself that permission to make the decisions that you need to make. The cleaner, the nanny, the meal service, whatever it is. And if you're struggling to make those decisions, if you're struggling to give yourself permission, a couple of suggestions. Number one is to find a supportive environment, whether it's a mentor, a family member, a friend, somebody who you really trust and somebody who you know has your best interests at heart. They may be able to support you as you make some of these difficult decisions and release responsibility for all of the things. Another thing to do is to channel your inner mentor. And there are a couple of ways you might do that. One is to go to your future self. So you imagine yourself 10 years out. That would be like me, for example, looking at my beginning stages, right? The first time I dropped my son off at daycare. So if I could go back in time and make recommendations, I think I would know what I would say to myself. I think I would absolutely encourage my younger self to get more help, to get all the support that she needed to make the transition as seamlessly as possible and to take care of herself the best that she absolutely could. And so give yourself that grace, turn to your future self and ask her what advice she would give you in this moment. Another way to channel your inner mentor is to have a fictitious board of directors. Imagine you are sitting at a table and around that table are some of your favorite mentors, whether they're real mentors, professors, bosses, colleagues, people who have really helped you out in real life. They might be mentors that you've never actually met, whether it's somebody who you follow, they're a thought leader, or someone who, an author, or somebody who you know of, whose opinion and whose perspective you really appreciate, and ask yourself what those people would tell you in this moment. And you will be surprised, pleasantly surprised at the wisdom that you actually have within you that you can elicit by proxy by using your imagination and resorting or seeking that guidance from your future self or from that fictitious board of directors. Now, the fourth suggestion that I have, or the fourth, piece of advice is to let you know, 11 years in, that the landscape is going to shift, but the challenges will remain. And part of your practice is to learn the art of making peace with your choices. So when you're first starting out, if you are literally navigating your return to work, maybe it's been a year, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year and a half, depending on where you live and where you practice and what your mat leave policy looks like. When you first go back to work in those early stages, chances are your world is very physically demanding. You're changing diapers, you're feeding the children, you're dressing them in the morning, you're carrying them, you're lifting them, you're putting strollers in the back seat, in the trunk of your car, you're navigating car seats. I mean, all of those physically demanding things. It is exhausting. I have been there. And even just talking about it now, my shoulders are starting to hurt. So I get it. As your children get older, you will find that there is less of a physical demand on you because they will start to get themselves into the car. They will dress themselves. I'm still not at the stage where they're packing their own lunches, but I can see that on the horizon. And so the nature of the commitment is going to lessen in some ways. And at the same time, what you'll find is that there are new challenges. So for example, navigating the internet and screen time and discipline and school and grades and friendships and all the different stages will invite new challenges. And so I think sometimes we can look at that initial transition, going back to work, mat leave transition, and say, well, that is really a critical time. It is, and it's not the end. The end isn't really something that I don't even see what the end would be, frankly. I think it's an ongoing navigation and ongoing decisions that you make over the course of your life in terms of how you want to allocate your time, energy, and focus. And so instead of looking for a one and done balance approach, what I would invite you to think about is that finding balance or integration isn't a problem that you solve. Instead, it's a problem that you manage. Now, whether or not we want to call it a problem, I'm just calling it that for convenience. I think it carries a bit of a negative connotation that I don't really mean to imply, but it aligns with something that John Gottman said. John Gottman is a counselor. He specializes in marriage and relationships. And one of the things that he says, which I think is apt here, is that in a long-term committed relationship, you are going to have problems that cannot be solved. These are just fundamental differences. And when it comes to having your professional work, having your family life, and all the other interests and commitments that you have outside of those two spheres, there's always going to be a tension between them. You're always going to be making choices. And so rather than holding yourself to the standard of fixing the problem, of finding balance, I would invite you to think of this as an ongoing practice. It's an art. It's something that you manage over the course of time. And your choices will then be made with that consciousness, that intentionality, where you know that, for example, there's a phase of your life where you're going to be spending more of your time, energy, and focus on your family and correspondingly less time professionally. Or maybe you decide that you want to spend more time committed to your professional work and less time with your family. And either way, what will happen then is that you'll see others who have made a different choice. So for example, if you choose to spend more time with your family, you might then see colleagues who at one point were at your level who maybe skyrocket in their career. They start their own firm and it's a huge success, or they get promoted to partner or promoted to practice group leader, or you see them advance in an organization. They take on a really prestigious title, and you might look at them and look at yourself and think, oh gosh, like I really have fallen short here in terms of my potential and my expectations. That's when it gets really hard. And what I'd invite you to consider if you ever find yourself in one of those moments is to focus on the choices that you have made. Because in order to do that other thing, you may have needed to make sacrifices that you were not willing to make. Correspondingly, you might be the person who has achieved those things. You might be the person who has achieved the promotions, who has the title, and maybe it meant spending less time at home with your family. And maybe that's a choice that you also need to celebrate in the sense that that was a choice that you made, and that is leading to a different set of outcomes. So for every choice that you make, for every yes, there's a corresponding no. And part of the exercise is being okay with the fact that sometimes you're going to pick family and sometimes you're going to pick work. I had a real life example of this last week where my husband took the kiddos over for a vacation for 2 nights, and I stayed back and I worked and I studied for my exam that I needed to take. And so I had hard moments during that week where I felt kind of left out, like I was missing out on the family vacation. And at the same time, I needed to remind myself of why I was doing this. And so you may find the same thing. And going back to the headline of number 4, it is that things are going to shift. The landscape is going to shift over the course of time as you navigate those early years where your kids are babies, then toddlers, then just entering school to entering middle school and beyond. I haven't got to the stage of teenagers yet. I will absolutely keep you posted as I get there. Everything is going to shift. And the idea there is simply to make peace with the choices that you make and give yourself the grace and compassion that you have made the decisions that are the best for you and for your family. Now, the last suggestion or the last highlight I'd like to offer here is that this is an opportunity for you to cultivate your CEO mindset. When you have a family and you have your professional work and you are now balancing all of them, you have got a workload to manage, you've got a family schedule to manage, and this requires visioning, planning, and execution on your part. You are stepping into the role of CEO at work and at home and the overarching integration of those two components. So what I would invite you to consider is how this is an opportunity for you both at the office and at home. So at work, this means this could be an opportunity for you to build a team that will support you and to learn how to delegate really well to that team, starting with your assistant, moving into other lawyers that may support you and other professionals at work who can help you build your practice. This is an opportunity for you to hone your time and practice management skills. So when you have a little family at home, it puts additional pressure on you to really achieve and do what you need to do during your working hours. Now, I think I'll just offer a few ideas here. For me, what I found to be really helpful when I went back to work was to, number 1, be efficient with the time that I used in the office. Now, this can have a trade-off in that there was less social time available to me, which I think in hindsight, I would have worked harder to integrate because I think it's really important to maintain your social ties and to give yourself the grace of a bit of fun when you're not at home and when you are at work. I have staggered days sometimes. So taking advantage of days, for example, if my husband was able to do a pickup to work longer that day, I've traditionally had Fridays as a flexible day. My husband does not work Fridays. He's traveling Mondays to Thursdays, but it means Fridays have traditionally been my days where I can start work early and work late if I need to. Now what I do, I work remotely most of the time and I take advantage of early morning hours. So if you know me, you know that I wake up quite early, usually around 5 o'clock on a traditional school day. I exercise and then I work for about an hour and a half before I start the rest of my day, which involves making breakfasts and lunches for my kids, getting them off to school. And then I come home and I start working after that. And then I work until I pick them up from school or they do after school care. That might change this year for my son now that he's got a phone, he's getting older, things are shifting, but it's looking at pockets of time and getting really creative about how you want to orchestrate your time. For lawyers that I've worked with, this has also meant having designated days where they get to stagger, maybe days like a Wednesday, for example, they'll stay late at the office, maybe they'll have a yoga class and then they'll go back to work. Maybe they'll have a takeout meal. Building in time, using your partner, using each other, talking to each other, planning your weeks. Some partners will do this. They'll meet every weekend and they'll talk about what's coming up for the week and then they can plan strategically around that. So great communication is really helpful. So think of all the ways that you can creatively manage your time so that you're able to really have the benefit of doing the work that you want to do at the office and also enjoying the time that you have at home with your family. Another CEO flavored development that you might have is really narrowing your focus and refining your practice. So as your time becomes more constrained, your focus can also become more constrained, and that can be a good thing. You might find that you let go of some of the excess, so projects that don't really align with your goals that you don't really need to do, so you can spend more time on the things that add the most value for you. You might find that you build your relationships. So again, going back to that idea of being really intentional with your time, find ways to cultivate and maintain relationships with the people in your organization who support you and can help you advance in your career. You will also get really good at establishing boundaries, the boundaries that you need to thrive, both at work and at home. And finally, what you might also find is that you're able to develop your executive presence. So as you become a delegator, as you become more of a decision maker, as you find you really need to set your boundaries and be intentional and clear about what you're doing, you may find that that also helps you elevate your executive presence. Now at home, you may find that as you have a team to really support you in your managing of the kids and other aspects of house life, that you are, again, increasing your delegation skills. You may find that you are able to really clarify your goals and your values as you're being questioned, as your time available to you is more constrained. You're going to be more intentional about what you focus on. You may find that your organizational skills are further enhanced as you need to manage multiple calendars, your children's calendars, your nanny, the daycare, your school, your partner's calendar, your work calendar. As you're managing all of the different calendars, you'll get really good at organizing and delegating. You may find that this also helps you strengthen your connection with your kids, with your partner. And finally, what I'd invite you to really focus on here is developing your relationship with yourself. So as you are navigating these challenging times, learning how to trust yourself, learning how to give yourself the benefit of the doubt, learning how to be kind to yourself no matter what, this is something that you will carry with you well beyond this present time of navigating the challenges. This is the relationship that you'll have for a lifetime. So to recap, what I offer to each of you, all of you new parents who are just getting started, or to the parents who've been at this for a while and continue to struggle, in which case you are definitely not alone. As I mentioned, this is an ongoing practice. I have 5 overarching suggestions. So number 1 is there is no right or wrong way to do it. You are the utmost authority in your own life. And so whatever you decide is best for you and your family, that is the right way for you. The second component of what I offer today is to assess your choices based on a number of different factors that reflect your unique circumstances. And factors I'd invite you to consider are your child and your particular child or children's needs, your partner, their capacity, your relationship with them, the role that each of you is playing within your family, your work, of course, the nature of your work, the flexibility, what is required of you in your particular position, and is it the right position for you? Do you need to make changes where you are, or do you need to make larger changes overall? Financial considerations. What is it that you have the capacity to spend on, and what are you investing in that may present a short-term cost, but that can ultimately deliver a long-term reward? I'd also invite you to consider your own philosophies when it comes to childcare and household help, and what your comfort levels are on outsourcing elements of both. And then finally, you. Who are you as a parent? Who are you as a professional? What do you need in terms of support? What is going to make you happy? What most aligns with your values? Now, the third theme is that you do not need permission. And so I'm giving you that permission and invite you to give yourself the permission that you need to make the tough decisions around how you spend your time, how you spend your money, how you manage the difficult decisions you'll need to make between your work and your family. And if you're struggling to make those decisions, to tap into your support network and to tap into your own inner mentor, whether it's through imagining yourself at some point in the future, or doing the exercise of having that notional board of directors and asking people who you trust what you think they would do. Again, that being a proxy for your own internal wisdom. Number 4 is to accept that there's always going to be challenges, even though those challenges are going to present differently at different stages of your children's life and at different stages of your career. And so the practice here is to develop the art of making peace with your decisions. And then finally, this is a fabulous opportunity for you to develop your CEO mindset to step into that role of leadership at home and at work and to heighten your executive presence, all the while really refining your ability to manage projects, to delegate, to build a team, and to get really comfortable of being that person who is at the top of the pyramid and allowing others to help support you, both in terms of how you're parenting and in terms of how you're functioning at work. So this has been really rewarding for me. I really hope that this is resonating with you and that you're finding that you can see yourself in some of these examples, and that just this conversation alone is giving you some ideas about how you want to move forward with intention and consciousness as you further develop as a parent and as a professional. Now, I have a few final words, which again are just some thoughts I'd love to share with you to help support you as you move forward. And the first one is kind of what I alluded to earlier. If I look at myself 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I was first starting out, I think what I would say to my younger self is to get as much support as you possibly can. And I may have dialed up my support levels higher just to give myself that extra cushion, to give myself a little bit more grace. So give yourself as much support as you need, as much support as you can. I would also encourage you to delegate what you can. So try making a list of all the things that you have on your plate and circle the ones that you are absolutely content to see someone else take over, and then start a plan, one thing at a time, to get those things off your plate. I would invite you also to pick your battles and ignore the rest. This applies across the board with your kids, at work, with your partner, with yourself. Decide what's really, really important. And for the rest of it, I encourage you to let it go. If you decide that you're going to spend a phase of your life where you are really focused on your family, and that means you're not going to move as quickly as you want professionally, or vice versa, where you decide that you want to fast track professionally, and it means you're not going to be spending as much time at home as you would like, give yourself the grace to be at peace with the fact that there are trade-offs and that you're going to be okay no matter what, that the choices that you're making are a reflection of a conscious choice that you've made and that you have your own back on your own decisions. I would also encourage you to find ways to connect with your partner. That is an important relationship and one that is easily put to the side because your child may be screaming and tantruming and wanting your attention. If you don't give them your attention, there will be immediate consequences, whereas your partner may be a little bit more patient and chances are isn't out there tantruming, although maybe they are, begging you for attention. And so it might be harder to then turn your focus, especially when you're tired, especially when you feel like you've committed in so many different areas. But I encourage you to think of creative ways that you can connect with your partner to maintain that relationship, to maintain that warmth, to maintain communication, because it can be really challenging, especially when you've got the different humans, you've got your professional work, your partner has their professional work, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got all the other things. So I invite you to think about how you want to make that work for you and for your partner. I also encourage you to find ways to connect with yourself. Let's not leave you out of the equation. You are, after all, the engine that is driving all of this. And so this is where it becomes so important to put your gas mask on first if you're thinking about, or I guess it's an oxygen mask, your oxygen mask on first. If you think about that airplane analogy, what do you need in order to thrive as a parent and as a professional? I invite you to let it be messy and imperfect and to be okay with that. If you yell at your kids, you're human. If your house is a mess, that's okay. If you miss a deadline or you forget an appointment, don't beat yourself up over it. Just learn from it and move forward and learn that it's okay and you will do better next time. You may also want to speak up at work if you're finding that it's really, really challenging and that you are, let's say, missing deadlines or you are missing appointments and it's not a one-off. It is becoming quite problematic. Give yourself the benefit of getting the support you need, whether it is speaking up at work, having a conversation with somebody who can help you to navigate the challenges that you're facing, whether it's going as far as to reestablish or recalibrate your workload or the hours that you're going to be working, whether it's reaching out for a counselor or a coach or someone who can help you to navigate some of these challenges that you're having. Please, please, please give yourself that support. You need that support. You deserve that support. And finally, as you navigate all of this, as you navigate the messy diapers, the before and after school pickups and drop-offs, the crazy meal planning, the kids that are sick, all of the things, I would invite you to absolutely do your best. And I know it sounds really hard after some of the things that I've just covered, but to have fun with it. That these are such precious years. They are such precious years with your kids. They are crazy. They are wild. They are such a mix of the really, really, really amazing, excellent times and the times where you just want to put your head in the sand and shake your head because frankly, you don't know what to do next. It is an absolute roller coaster, and yet it is one of the funnest rides you can ever hop on. And so I invite you to absolutely enjoy it for the adventure that it is. And that holds true as well for professional work. And most of my podcast episodes are all about your professional growth, your professional development, pushing out to the edges of your capacity in terms of being the most impactful and professional lawyer that you can be. And so I invite you to embrace all of it being messy and crazy and fun, and just to live your life fully, that this is your life. You've heard that expression. It's not a dress rehearsal. So to the extent you can, enjoy it, enjoy the ups and downs, and know that you are absolutely not alone when it comes to navigating some of these choices and decisions and challenges and opportunities. So with that, my dear friend, I thank you for joining me on this week's podcast episode. I am so loving the ability to connect with you. If you have any questions, by all means, please do feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to chat with you, and I would be delighted to support you through any of the challenges that you are navigating, especially if it's something that is around your family and work, and how to find a balance that works best for you. And with that, my dear, dear friends, I am going to go and celebrate my son's last day of being 10. I'm going to take them out and, explore a little bit. I'm actually taking them to the mall because I am upgrading my telephone. This is super, super fun. Big development over here. And for all of you, I wish you a beautiful week, and I look forward to reconnecting again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.